What if the true danger isn't out there but right beside you, smiling, listening, loving? What if the most damaging people are not the monsters we imagine in our nightmares, but the ones we trust with our secrets? We've been trained to fear the obvious threats, the aggressive, the loud, the visibly unstable. But the real psychological threat is subtle, insidious, and often cloaked in kindness. It wears the mask of the familiar. Most people walk through life believing they know themselves, and that they can read others. But Carl Jung warned of a deeper truth, that the unconscious governs far more of our behavior than we dare admit. In The Ego and the Unconscious, he suggests that what we repress or ignore doesn't disappear. It gathers strength, waiting for an opportunity to emerge, often through projection or manipulation. The battlefield of the psyche is not fought in the open. It's fought in the shadows. This is where real danger lies. Not in what someone says, but in what their unconscious projects. Not in what we do, but in the psychic fields we unknowingly step into. You may think you're making a decision freely, but you could be acting out someone else's buried shame, rage, or insecurity. This is not paranoia, it's psychology. People can become vessels for unconscious energy, both their own and others. Emotional manipulation, psychic invasion, and spiritual bypassing are not just tactics of the toxic. They are often performed unconsciously under the guise of love, duty, or even spiritual awakening. That's what makes them so dangerous. It isn't just their intent, it's their lack of awareness. When we interact with others, we are not simply engaging with their words or gestures. We are engaging with a complex web of unseen motives, buried traumas, unresolved complexes, and inherited wounds. Jung knew that when unconscious material is not made conscious, it is lived out as fate. And fate, in this sense, often comes wrapped in the shape of a person who seems too good to be true. This video isn't meant to scare you. It's meant to wake you. Because once you begin to see the unconscious forces at play, in others and within yourself, you will realize that the greatest manipulations are not conscious strategies, but soul-level entanglements. You'll begin to notice how people don't just influence you, they inhabit you. Their unresolved patterns can seep into your psychic skin. By the time you finish watching this, you won't just question others, you'll question yourself. You'll begin to wonder how many of your choices were truly yours, and how many were echoes of someone else's unconscious will. Let's begin by peeling back the mask of the first psychological profile, the unconscious manipulator. Section 1, the unconscious manipulator. They never intended to hurt you, at least not in the way you're thinking. In fact, when you first met them, you may have felt like you'd found something rare. Someone deeply sensitive, perhaps even spiritually attuned. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, you began to feel a weight that wasn't yours. You found yourself apologizing more often, shrinking a little bit to accommodate their pain, until one day, you realized you were living inside someone else's emotional architecture. You weren't loving them. You were absorbing them. The unconscious manipulator doesn't set out to control. They survive. Their entire psychological strategy is rooted not in malicious intent, but in an inner fracture that they themselves have never examined. Their psyche bleeds into yours not because they desire power, but because they have never learned to contain their wounds. In Jungian terms, they are possessed by an unconscious complex, often an injured child or abandoned self, that demands rescue through projection. And if you are empathic, receptive, or simply too kind to draw the line, you become the chosen container. Jung wrote, "What we do not confront in ourselves, we will encounter as fate." For the unconscious manipulator, this quote isn't a metaphor, it's their daily reality. What they cannot integrate, guilt, rejection, fear of abandonment, gets projected outward not as events but as people. You become their savior, their betrayer, their missing parent. They don't know they're doing it, but that doesn't make it less real. They live in psychic blindness, assigning you a symbolic role in a drama they've never stopped reenacting. And because it's unconscious, it's immune to reason. You may wonder how someone so seemingly fragile could be so invasive. That's the paradox. Their vulnerability is precisely what makes them powerful. It disarms your defenses. Their wounds make you want to help, to stay, to carry. But in doing so, you cross a line that should never be crossed. You begin living parts of their emotional life for them. You feel their shame as your own. You feel guilty for having boundaries. Their dependency becomes a kind of quiet tyranny, one enforced not by demand but by despair. The manipulation isn't overt. It comes in size, in silence, in the subtle tilt of blame when you don't show up in just the right way. It shows up when you try to leave and they whisper how you're abandoning them like everyone else. It's in the way they rewrite reality to fit their emotional script. You become the villain not because of what you've done, but because of what they need you to represent. The unconscious manipulator doesn't distort reality intentionally, they breathe distortion. To them the story is real, and you're trapped inside it. You might think your empathy is your strength, but in this dynamic, it's the very thing that binds you. Your ability to feel deeply makes you the perfect projection screen. And the more aware you become, the more unbearable the relationship feels, because now you're conscious of how your emotional labor is being extracted without consent. You try to reason with them, but logic fails in the face of archetypal possession. You're not dealing with a person. You're dealing with their unresolved psychic myth, and you've been cast in a role you never auditioned for. Jung warned that when people are unconscious of their symbolic projections, they don't see you, they see an illusion. The savior, the betrayer, the redeemer, the executioner. And the longer you play along, the more you forget who you really are. This is the true cost of staying entangled with the unconscious manipulator. Not just exhaustion but identity erosion. You no longer know where they end and you begin. Escaping them isn't just about setting boundaries, it's about reclaiming your psychic sovereignty. As you detach from the unconscious manipulator, the tension between self and other intensifies. You begin to recognize that their emotional demands aren't just external. They've become internalized. Their wounds have infected your psyche in ways you hadn't anticipated. The deeper you go into their projection, the more you realize it's not just a question of saving them, it's about saving yourself from the very essence of their emotional contagion. This is where the manipulation reaches its apex. Not in direct demands, but in the subtle compulsion to become an emotional caretaker at the expense of your own psychic well-being. The psychic balance tips, and you become entangled in an emotional web that isn't of your making. This is the silent trap. They've managed to convince you that their suffering is yours to carry, and for a time you may feel powerless to stop it. But the first step towards true liberation is the painful recognition that to maintain your identity, you must stop becoming the vessel of their pain. The act of waking up from this psychic entanglement can be jolting. It's not like waking from a bad dream, it's realizing that the dream you were living wasn't even yours to begin with. The unconscious manipulator's power lies in their ability to induce you to lose track of your own boundaries and desires. But you will only gain back your psychological freedom when you understand one simple truth. You are not responsible for their emotional survival. Their projections are not your fault, and their wounds are not your burden. The moment you reclaim this understanding, the emotional fog begins to lift. You no longer walk in the shadows of their needs. Instead, you step into the light of your own agency. But this journey isn't linear, and it isn't without consequence. As you begin to withdraw from the psychic vampire that has unknowingly drained you, you also confront something deeper. The illusion that you were ever truly free in this relationship. And once you recognize the manipulation for what it is, you can begin to heal. The shadow of projection has been lifted, but the journey ahead leads you to even more profound psychological truths. Now, it's time to confront a more insidious form of manipulation. The one that wears a mask of virtue and protection. The next profile we explore is the bearer of the persona. Section 2, the bearer of the persona. The bearer of the persona, a master of social performance, lives within the rigid confines of a carefully constructed identity. On the surface, they appear flawless, radiating warmth, reliability, and an almost comforting predictability. To the outside world, they embody the idealized version of a human being, everything society expects and more. But when you interact with them, something feels off. The conversations feel too perfect, too rehearsed, as if they're performing rather than engaging. You're left wondering, where is the person behind the mask? Who are they when the role they're playing falls away? The mask they wear, crafted so meticulously over time, has become so ingrained in their psyche that it has overshadowed any sense of real spontaneity. It's as though their entire existence has been sculpted to fit the contours of an external expectation, to conform to an ideal that not only the world demands but that they demand of themselves. The authentic self has been buried beneath layers of social pretense, so deeply that even they have forgotten what it means to simply be without the need to perform. This persona isn't inherently evil. It doesn't seek to harm, yet its power is insidious because it suffocates the very essence of the individual. The more they identify with this mask, the less space there is for genuine expression, for the messy complexity of human experience. The persona strips away the nuances of their emotions, the vulnerabilities, the rawness of their true being. It's a double-edged sword. They become more accepted, more admired, and yet they are further and further removed from their own soul. This is where the danger lies. In their quest for perfection, they sacrifice authenticity. What's left is a carefully curated illusion, a life that looks enviable from the outside, but lacks the depth and richness of unfiltered human experience. The deeper they fall into this trap, the more they begin to believe that the mask they wear is who they truly are. The boundaries between performance and personhood blur, and the result is a hollow shell of what could have been a full, expansive, and deeply authentic existence. But the implications don't stop with the individual. Those who come into contact with the bearer of the persona often find themselves unknowingly pulled into this dance of performance. When you interact with someone so entrenched in their persona, you begin to mirror their behavior. You too start to wear a mask. The dynamic becomes an echo chamber of conformity, where everyone involved is more concerned with fitting in than with genuinely connecting. The social fabric is woven with artifice. You feel compelled to meet expectations, to play a role that satisfies the illusion. It's subtle at first, almost imperceptible, until one day you realize that you have become someone else. You start censoring your own emotions, adjusting your behavior to align with the personas around you. The mask you wear becomes so ingrained that you no longer recognize the person beneath it. The lines between your true self and the persona you've adopted become disturbingly blurry, until you too forget what it means to be real. Jung's idea of individuation, this process of becoming one's true, authentic self, comes to a grinding halt in such environments. The bearer of the persona not only suppresses their own journey towards self-actualization, but also inadvertently stifles the process for those around them. The rigid roles, the constant performance, trap everyone in a state of stagnation. The individual is no longer allowed to explore the darker, more complex parts of themselves. Those aspects of the psyche that hold the potential for growth, change, and integration. These parts are repressed and denied, buried under the weight of societal expectation. The persona is a defense mechanism against facing the parts of oneself that are uncomfortable or unpleasant. But in denying those aspects of the self, the shadow, individuality cannot flourish. The person is stuck, trapped in a perpetual loop of acting, of pretending, of maintaining an identity that doesn't allow for real transformation. The persona does not invite spontaneity, it invites predictability. And predictability, while providing comfort, is ultimately a prison. The individual trapped behind the mask loses the ability to feel, to express, and most dangerously, to question. The moment they begin to question, they risk shattering the illusion, the very identity that has become their security blanket. This is the real risk, that in trying to fit into a world of expectations, they lose the capacity to exist as a full, imperfect human being. The process of individuation demands that we break free from such masks, confront our hidden desires, and embrace our deepest fears. But the bearer of the persona cannot do this without first confronting the fact that the persona itself is a form of self-deception. Until that happens, they will remain trapped in the illusion of who they think they must be. The mask is seductive because it offers acceptance. It is the ultimate shield from rejection, and for some, it becomes an all-consuming need. But eventually, the consequences of living behind this mask are impossible to ignore. The longer they suppress the truth, the more they distance themselves from the richness of their inner life. It is only when they allow themselves to remove the mask, to peel away the layers of artifice, that they can truly begin the journey towards self-actualization. And this, of course, is a terrifying process. For how does one begin to live without the protection of the mask? The freedom that comes with authenticity is profound, but it is also profoundly unsettling. But unless they confront this discomfort, they will remain forever locked in a prison of their own making. As we shift from the world of masks to the realm of repressed emotions and denied aspects of the self, we enter into the territory of the owner of the repressed shadow. Here, the hidden forces that drive behavior are no longer simply suppressed. They are buried so deeply that they shape the individual's reality in ways they cannot yet perceive. Section 3. The owner of the repressed shadow. The owner of the repressed shadow lives a life of carefully maintained order, a life of external control. On the surface, they are models of discipline, polite, reliable, and composed. To the world, they appear as pillars of virtue, bound by high moral standards and ever so reliable. But beneath this mask of civility, there lurks an ocean of darkness, a tempest of emotions and desires that have been ruthlessly suppressed. These are the parts of themselves that they cannot or will not acknowledge. Their anger, their fear, their lust, their jealousy, those primal aspects of the human experience that society deems unacceptable. Instead of facing these parts of themselves, they bury them deep within their psyche, leaving them to fester and distort over time. The result is a volatile cauldron of repressed emotions, bubbling just beneath the surface, waiting for the slightest trigger to send them spiraling outward in explosive outbursts. Jung described the shadow as the thing we refuse to recognize in ourselves. And this is precisely what these individuals have done. They have refused to recognize the darker parts of themselves, consigning them to the depths of their unconscious. But the shadow cannot be ignored forever. It doesn't go away, it merely waits for the right moment to assert itself. And when it does, the results are often disproportionate to the situation at hand. These people can seem perfectly composed, perhaps even admirable, until a minor inconvenience or criticism causes them to erupt with an intensity that feels utterly out of place. A small mistake, a slight misunderstanding, or a minor flaw can trigger an overwhelming flood of emotion, rage, resentment, or intense defensiveness that seems wildly out of proportion to the situation. These eruptions feel irrational, even absurd, as though something far deeper is at play. It is as though the repressed emotions have been given the smallest crack through which to escape, and in that brief opening, they flood outward uncontrollably. The issue is not the emotion itself, but the way in which it has been suppressed. When an individual refuses to face their own darkness, when they repress their most primal emotions in the name of moral superiority or self-discipline, those emotions do not simply vanish. They accumulate like pressure building behind a dam, until they finally burst free in an uncontrollable outpouring. These individuals cannot tolerate emotions in others, especially emotions they find unacceptable or weak. They cannot afford to see those emotions, for they are afraid that they will be reminded of their own. It's as if the reflection of their own repressed emotions in others becomes a mirror they are unwilling to look into. So, they project their discomfort onto those around them, finding fault in others' emotional expressions, condemning them for weaknesses they themselves fear. Their moralistic attitude toward others serves as a defense mechanism, a way of deflecting attention from their own emotional turmoil. In these instances, they often resort to passive aggression, subtle sabotage, or holding grudges. They do not confront their feelings head-on. Instead, they engage in indirect forms of aggression, sulking, withdrawing, or criticizing in ways that feel disconnected from the actual issue. This passive aggression is a hallmark of the unintegrated shadow. Emotions that cannot be directly expressed are instead channeled through passive, underhanded means. It's as if they are trying to punish others for making them feel vulnerable without ever acknowledging the source of their discomfort. This subtle, insidious aggression is difficult to pinpoint, and yet, it is often the most destructive form of emotional manipulation. It undermines relationships, erodes trust, and leaves everyone involved walking on eggshells, unsure of where the next emotional outburst will come from. The shadow, however, is not only made up of repressed negative emotions, it also contains the unlived potential that the individual has denied or refused to develop. Jung suggested that the shadow contains everything about us that we repress, both the dark and the light. When we fail to embrace our full range of emotions, desires, and potentials, we not only suppress our weaknesses but also the very qualities that could help us grow. The result is a person who is not only emotionally stunted but also creatively and spiritually blocked. They are living only half a life, one that is disciplined, controlled, and moralistic, but devoid of the richness that comes from embracing all aspects of the self. Their failure to recognize their own potential creates a toxic environment, where the stifled aspects of themselves slowly poison their psyche, preventing them from reaching their full potential. Living with someone who owns their repressed shadow is like walking through a minefield. You never know when the next explosion will happen, when a seemingly insignificant remark or action will set them off. It's exhausting. The emotional landscape around them is fraught with tension, as everyone must tiptoe around their volatility, careful not to awaken the hidden beast within. There is no room for authentic expression, no space for vulnerability, because at any moment, the repressed emotions could erupt. This environment is stifling, exhausting, and deeply unsettling. It's like being trapped in a cage of someone else's unresolved issues with no way out. The sense of unpredictability creates a constant undercurrent of fear, as you never know when the next emotional detonation will occur. The person with the repressed shadow may seem calm on the surface, but their emotional landscape is a ticking time bomb. The real danger here lies not only in the explosive eruptions of emotion but in the constant suppression of vital parts of the self. The person who represses their shadow is not only emotionally volatile, they are spiritually and psychologically incomplete. Their failure to integrate the shadow means that they are not living in alignment with their true self. They are constantly at war with themselves, and this inner conflict spills out into their relationships and their interactions with the world. The unintegrated shadow creates a person who is unable to connect with others on a deep, authentic level, because they are disconnected from themselves. They may seem composed, even admirable on the outside, but inside, they are fragmented and disjointed, lost in a battle with their own emotions. As we shift from the world of repressed emotions and shadow eruptions to the realm of moral superiority and control, we enter into the territory of the moral controller, someone who uses guilt as a tool for manipulation and dominance. The next section will delve into this dangerous dynamic, exploring how guilt is weaponized in the service of control. The moral controller represents an even more insidious manifestation of psychological dominance, a figure whose primary weapon is guilt. Where the owner of the repressed shadow struggles with their own volatile emotions, the moral controller operates with a different strategy altogether. They may not display the same outward aggression or emotional explosions, but their subtle manipulation is no less destructive. Guilt, as a psychological tool, allows them to hold power over others, to dictate how people should behave, feel, and think. They operate from a moral high ground, presenting themselves as righteous, pure, and just. Their entire persona is constructed around an image of virtue. Someone who knows what is right and wrong, someone who upholds the highest standards. But this seemingly noble facade hides a far more dangerous reality. The moral controller thrives on creating a sense of indebtedness in others. They have a unique ability to make others feel as though they are constantly in the wrong, constantly falling short of an ideal they have set up. This ideal may be rooted in moral or ethical standards, or it may simply be a reflection of the controller's personal beliefs, which they enforce with unwavering certainty. The guilt they impose is not a simple emotion but a powerful force that begins to shape the behavior of those around them. Over time, their victims may begin to second-guess themselves, doubt their own moral compass, and feel as though they are always in the wrong, no matter how hard they try to please the moral controller. This creates a profound sense of dependency on the controller's approval and validation, as their approval becomes the ultimate measure of one's worth. Much like the bearer of the persona, the moral controller imposes a rigid framework on those around them, but instead of a social mask, they impose a moral one. Their framework doesn't just dictate how people should act. It forces them to internalize a particular way of thinking about themselves and their relationships. The victim of a moral controller is made to feel inadequate, unworthy, and perpetually in debt to the controller. Even the smallest of offenses can be magnified, used to reinforce the controller's moral superiority. This is a form of psychological bondage, a situation where the victim feels as though they cannot escape the weight of their own guilt without incurring further punishment. The moral controller's guilt manipulation is often subtle and insidious. It may come in the form of passive-aggressive remarks, veiled accusations, or even seemingly well-intentioned advice. They may say things like, "If you really cared, you'd do this," or "I thought you were better than that." These comments are designed to induce self-doubt and guilt, to make the recipient question their own actions and motivations. Over time, this constant guilt-tripping erodes the victim's sense of self, making them feel as though they are forever falling short of the controller's lofty standards. This emotional manipulation is not always overt. It may be disguised as concern, love, or a desire for improvement. Yet, the underlying effect is always the same. The victim becomes subjugated to the controller's moral authority, constantly striving to meet impossible expectations. At the heart of this manipulation lies the controller's own fear. The moral controller may feel insecure in their own morality, so they project this insecurity onto others, using guilt as a way to reaffirm their own righteousness. This is why the controller often refuses to acknowledge any flaws in their own behavior. Doing so would threaten the very foundation of their power. The guilt they impose on others serves as a way of deflecting attention from their own vulnerability. If they can make others feel guilty, they can distract from their own fears and inadequacies. This creates a toxic cycle where the controller's need for validation and control perpetuates the emotional suffering of those around them. In a world dominated by the moral controller, genuine emotional connection becomes impossible. The victims are trapped in a constant state of moral assessment, always wondering whether they are doing enough, being enough, or living up to the standards set for them. This creates a chasm between the controller and those they seek to dominate, a space where true empathy, understanding, and human connection cannot thrive. The controller's manipulation destroys trust and intimacy, replacing authentic relationships with power struggles and emotional warfare. In the long run, this dynamic can leave those caught in its grasp feeling emotionally bankrupt, as if they have given all of themselves to meet an ideal that can never be reached. As we move from the emotional manipulation of guilt to the intricacies of psychological warfare in relationships, we turn our attention to the next figure in this psychological landscape, the gaslighter. A more covert and complex manipulator, the gaslighter twists reality itself, making others question their perception of truth. This transition brings us deeper into the realm of mind games and psychological control, and will further unravel the mechanisms of emotional dominance and distortion. As we've explored the depths of psychological manipulation, we come face to face with the harrowing reality that the most dangerous forces are often invisible, lurking beneath the surface, embedded within the subconscious. The unconscious manipulator, the bearer of the persona, and the owner of the repressed shadow each represent a different facet of the hidden self, projecting their unresolved wounds, false identities, and suppressed darkness onto others. What they all share is a deep-seated fear of their own vulnerability, a fear so pervasive that it shapes their behavior in ways that are not immediately apparent. These are not the obvious, overt villains we are trained to identify, they are the subtle forces that seep into our lives, often cloaked in charm, reliability, and virtue. The psychological damage these figures inflict may not always be physical, but it is no less real. Over time, the victims of such manipulation become ensnared in a web of guilt, self-doubt, and emotional confusion. The process of individuation, the journey towards self-awareness and authenticity, becomes stifled, buried under layers of projections, personas, and repressed shadows. You may begin to lose sight of who you truly are, as the weight of others' psychological needs and expectations weigh heavy on your shoulders. The real danger is not that you are being manipulated, but that you may come to accept the distorted versions of reality that these individuals impose upon you, until they become your own. However, the key to reclaiming your power lies in self-awareness. Jung teaches that the path to psychological freedom is through the conscious integration of the unconscious. By acknowledging and confronting these hidden forces, whether in yourself or in others, you can begin to reclaim your autonomy and take control of your emotional landscape. The illusions of the moral controller and the bearer of the persona lose their power once you see them for what they are: projections, masks, and shadows. It is only when you are willing to face the darkness within that you can emerge into the light of true self-awareness. The journey may be uncomfortable, but it is essential for your psychological growth and liberation. As we move toward the next chapter, we delve deeper into the intricate and insidious world of gaslighting, a phenomenon that distorts not just behavior but the very fabric of reality itself. The greatest trick of the unconscious is not its concealment, but its ability to rewrite the script of your life without your consent. You begin to feel things that aren't yours, carry burdens that were never yours to hold, and abandon parts of yourself to maintain peace in relationships that are, at their core, built on denial. People become fragments of one another's unhealed pain, and the soul begins to fracture under the weight of what remains unsaid and unseen. This is not just about psychological profiles, it's about the existential consequences of living in emotional falsehoods. When truth is buried, it festers. And when the shadow is repressed, it finds its way back through destruction, often disguised as love, duty, or righteousness. What makes this dangerous is not just the harm others can inflict, but the silent transformation you undergo in response. Over time, you begin to mirror the very dynamics you once resented. You learn to suppress your own emotions to avoid conflict. You play roles: rescuer, martyr, perfectionist, not because they're true to you but because they protect you. Slowly, the boundary between authenticity and adaptation disappears, and your psyche becomes a theater of masks and conditioned responses. This is the subtle death of the self, not dramatic but slow, persistent, and psychologically numbing. And no one notices, least of all you, until one day you wake up and realize you don't recognize your own reflection. Carl Jung warned that the greatest burden a child can bear is the unlived life of a parent. But this isn't just about parents, it's about anyone who refuses to confront their shadow and instead demands others live it out for them. When people project, when they cling to personas, when they bury rage beneath politeness, they are not just avoiding their truth, they are recruiting you to carry it. And if you don't develop the psychological clarity to see it, you will inherit trauma disguised as love, loyalty, or identity. True freedom comes not from avoiding such people but from no longer playing their game. To witness projection without absorbing it. To see the mask and not mistake it for the person. To feel the shadow's presence and choose not to run from it. In the end, this is not a call to paranoia, it's a call to awakening. Not everyone who wounds you is malicious. Not everyone who smiles is safe. But beyond judgment lies something more powerful, discernment. When you become aware of these archetypes, not just in others but within yourself, you begin to break the unconscious contracts you've signed with suffering. You stop reacting and start reflecting. You stop blaming and start integrating. The world becomes less of a battlefield and more of a mirror. And as Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Now you've seen the map of manipulators, personas, and repressed shadows. What you do next with that awareness is the beginning of your individuation. The journey doesn't end here. In fact, it's just beginning. In the next part, we descend further into the dark logic of gaslighting, where reality itself becomes a weapon.